Hey guys, so we are going to talk about mollusks in this video. Um, it's going to include a couple of different groups when we talk about mollusks, and we'll need to know the differences between those and their names and characteristics. But first, we're just going to talk about general characteristics of mollusks in the phylum of Mollusca. There are going to be quite a lot of these guys, got 90,000 that we know of. Lots of old ones, fossils, over 70,000 fossilized ones. There are 8 classes. What makes all these guys mollusks is the shell. So we talked about ancestral traits and derived traits. Ancestral trait is the shell for mollusks. And all these guys had shells. Some of these guys still have their shells, and some of them have evolved away from shells. These are also probable first land animals, probably the first ones, because these guys are moving on to land into fresh water as well as salt water. Sizes of these little bitty, we can see nobody uses change anymore, but if you did, you could see these as a reference. I mean, look how small this guy is. He's so teeny compared to this little bitty dime. We can see, again, little ones, giant squids are huge. We could see this adorable little sea slug. I mean, it's just so cute. And then this gigantic clam. Look at its frilly edges. It's a really big one. Beautiful here. So all sorts of different sizes in here. Over 40 feet. Tiny little bitties that you can't see with the naked eye, but they look like grains of sand. They're so small. Lots of different sizes, excuse me, of these. We think that these came about in the Cambrian period, where we have this huge diversification of life. When we talk about all the different time frames, we talk about the eons and then all the different periods within and what happened within those. So we think this huge burst of mollusks, the phylum Mollusca, that all those animals came about during the Cambrian explosion. Economic impact, huge. Mollusks are tons of money. So not thousands, but millions of tons of mollusks are harvested just on the eastern side of the US, just on the eastern seaboard alone. And out of those millions, hundreds of millions of metric tons, it's going to equate to trillions of dollars. So this is a huge, huge industry when we talk about mollusks and all their different groups that come underneath the phylum of Mollusca. So we have, pearls coming out of oysters, the man-made pearls, where it's kind of, implanted in there, and then over time it makes a pearl. Everything from, seafood that we are going to eat to seafood that is useful for these shell buttons, jewelry, decorations, edible food, again, over here. That's what I think of when I think of these guys. I think of what you can eat, because this is my hometown. And it was a few years back. I'm from Mobile, Alabama. And a few years ago, 3 years ago, Zuckerberg was doing like this 50-state tour. And so in Alabama, he stopped at Mobile. And so he stopped at Winsel's, and that's like one of the places that you have to go. And they've got 2 locations, and one's downtown. And they have delicious seafood in there. So if you like this, if you like seafood, that's a place to eat. And you can get oysters there, or scallops, or whatever, lots of different things, lots of different crab, lots of things to eat there. So this is, again, a huge industry here, trillions of dollars when we're talking about mollusks, massive. We said that mollusks are going to, their common ancestor, the common trait was shells. Everybody had a shell. Not all of their modern day equivalents have shells, but most of these guys do have shells. So part of creating the shell is calcium carbonate is needed for the shell. And we are running low on that if we're talking about marine situations, because climate change is happening. We have, if you check out NASA's website, it is a great place to find lots of information about climate change. What is it? What is evidence that it's happening? Let's see some proof over time and track those CO2 levels, because I hear a lot of climate change, I hate to say climate change deniers, people that keep saying that this is part of the natural flow of things and that the earth always cycles, which is true. The earth does cycle. But if you track the level of carbon dioxide that's out there and how fast it's been happening, it's pretty evident that there's some man-made effects going on in there. So when CO2 rises, and it is, CO2 levels are rising, when those CO2 levels rise, they mix, and CO2 can mix with water, like in the lakes and streams that are going to feed into the vast majority of the water on this planet, the oceans. And so the CO2 is going to combine with the water and carbonate ions, and it can form carbonic acid. It locks up the carbonate, and if you are an organism that needs calcium carbonate and you can't get the carbonate, you cannot form your calcium carbonate shells with this. So when we're forming carbonic acid, I just said acid in the name, so it is lowering the pH. It's making the oceans more acidic. We can see pH is going down over here as CO2 levels are rising. It is locking up the calcium, and so the shells are not being able to be as healthy as they are, and the animals aren't making it because they can't form a healthy shell without it. So here again was information regarding climate change, just broad sweeping evidence for climate change, and then specific to ocean acidification and locking up of the calcium ions is this link here. So we've got some good stuff here, and Greta hasn't made the news lately. I'm making this video, I'm gonna date it. I'm making this video in September of fall 2020, so Greta hadn't been in the news lately. But she is very much so in the news, and an adamant person who is trying to educate others about climate change. Most of us have seen Greta or heard of Greta. I have lost my connection. So we are going to start talking about the different classes, and there are a few of them. See if I can get it to share again. Come on, there it goes. Okay, so we have the class bivalves, and it has bi in the name, so it's got two, it means two, and it's got two shells. Bivalves are two shells. So these guys are filter feeders, suspension feeders, filter feeders. Those shells are going to be held in place. They kind of look like those lamp shells that we talked about when we saw moss animals and ribbon worms in the previous video, but these are different. They are going to have their shells hold together by adductor muscles. There's going to be one at the front and one at the back. So if you enjoy having fresh oysters, if that is your thing, you got to slice those. You got to cut those muscles when you slice open the oyster so you can get to the meat inside. So they are held together with adductor muscles. And so lots of things are in the class bivalves, but basically the two-shelled guys, clams, oysters, scallops. These guys can be fresh or salt water. You can find them everywhere. This guy, this flame scallop, is a saltwater guy. It's beautiful. And then these are my kids in this picture here, and my in-laws have a place on Lake Oconee. And so it fluctuates just like Lake Allatoona does. In the winter, you know, they lower the water down because it's a man-made lake, and so they'll let the water down, and then in the summertime and springtime they raise the water back up. So when the water is really low, my kids like to go out there and see what's out there. And so we found a whole bunch of gigantic freshwater I mean, look at it. It's really pretty big. Gigantic freshwater shells out there for the different types of clams and stuff that are present in Lake Oconee. Respiration. How are these things breathing and getting oxygen? Previously, we've mentioned about different things just dissolving. The particles, the CO2 will dissolve away from the organism and the oxygen will be absorbed into the organism, straight up diffusion. But here we have gills. We have gills, and those gills have cilia, and the cilia beat. They're those things attached to the edge of the cells, right? And the cilia will beat in a rhythm, and it will cause a current, and that is going to bring in the fresh water. It's going to bring in the fresh oxygen. With that fresh water, it's going to bring in food when it does this too. So we're going to bring in the oxygen here. We're going to have an inhalant siphon to bring things in. Here is the gills. All of this stuff that looks like it is almost like ribbed texture looking are gills, and it's covered in cilia, and they're all beating, and it's causing this current. So the water is going to flow in across these gills. It's going to be able to pull out the oxygen from that fresh water, and then the water goes out, the exhalant siphon, on its way out. It is going to bring in that water across through the in siphon and then out the excurrent siphon across the gills and absorb the oxygen. Their blood is going to look different than ours does. They are going to have hemolymph, and there's where our oxygen binds to iron on our hemoglobin molecules, and we have the capability of binding 4 oxygens for every molecule of hemoglobin, and they bind to iron. So every oxygen is going to bind to an iron in your red blood cells right now. In octopus or in bivalves, they have oxygen bind to copper. So their blood does not look red like ours does. It doesn't reflect back as red like ours does because of the iron. Their blood is going to look blue because of the copper that the oxygen binds to instead of iron like ours. So kind of cool factoid of theirs. They are going to have a circulatory system that is going to be open. What does an open circulatory system mean? You and I, we have blood vessels, right? We have arteries and veins and capillaries, and our blood should stay there. It should stay inside of the blood vessels. These guys don't have that. So their fluid, their blood is just kind of mixing and going around. They do have a heart that beats and pumps this fluid in directions, but it's not encased in a blood vessel when it does so. So they are pumping around their hemolymph. They are going to have an atria and a ventricle, a top chamber and a bottom chamber of their heart to pump the blood, but it is an open circulatory system. They don't have blood vessels to contain the blood. It just kind of flows over throughout the body on these guys. So 2-chambered heart, open circulatory system, pumping blood around the organs, and that blood is getting oxygenated at the gills. And again, copper base, which I think is super cool because it's just different. It's neat. Diffusion and what brings things across. Hopefully we covered this concept in previous science class, if you've had a previous science class before you came here. But when I'm talking about diffusion, I keep telling you, oh, things just diffuse. It's always going from a high concentration to a low concentration. And if we were talking about oxygen, for example, that animal is using up lots of oxygen on the daily, just its cells doing its normal stuff, going through cellular metabolism, uses oxygen. So within the animal, oxygen levels are low compared to the water outside of the animal. And as the water comes in across the gills, the high levels of oxygen in the water are going to diffuse across those gill membranes and start to go inside the cells of the organism. And eventually that animal is going to pull what it needs and get the oxygen transported through its circulatory system, whether it's open or closed, to the tissues that need it. So that's basic diffusion. I don't need you to know all these things, but these are all different factors that can affect diffusion and how fast it happens, how fast things go from high to low. These different factors can affect that. I'm not going to be on your test about this because I want you to know about mollusks more so than diffusion. How are these guys going to feed? Well, we said that they have gills that have cilia all in them, and the gills are beating to cause a current to flow the water in. And these guys are filter feeders. They are suspension feeders. They are very good at what they do, bringing in the water, grabbing it with their little mouths. They have something called labial palps near their mouth. Here is the palp, here is the mouth. So the palps kind of grab it and bring it to the mouth, and then it's going to be swallowed down and head towards the stomach. Here's our gut here, and then the intestines, right? So, you know, where we can absorb all of the good stuff. And then eventually the waste is going to go out of the organism. So when we track GI system as far as feeding, another cool thing about these guys on here, we already mentioned that it's got a 2-chambered heart. It's got a atrium and a ventricle. Where is that? Okay, it's not in this picture. But these guys are going to have a kidney to help them filter out their waste as well. Not seeing it marked here. Gills, we've already talked about gills. We talked about the siphons. Underneath the shell is called the mantle. The 2 muscles that I told you have to cut if you're going to actually open this up. So when we dissect these things on Invertebrate Day, we will cut these adductor muscles, and I said they were on both sides of the shell. So here's this one on this side, here's this one on this side, and then a large portion of your bivalve is the foot, this muscular foot that they might use to get around or help them bury themselves down in the sand. Is that muscular foot. So we've gone over almost everything but the kidney. But again, these guys are filter feeders. They are very good at being filter feeders. And so I got this video a few years ago. I found it online, and I think it's really neat. So you can see these guys are crucial. We need them in our marshy swamp environments because they are filter feeders. They clean the water. And if you watch this video, you can see exactly what it looks like without them and with them. And so these guys, again, are really important. We need them. They're critical for the ecosystem in which they inhabit. How can they get around? I told y'all about the muscular foot, that large portion. If you dissect a clam in lab, you will see this big chunk in there that's kind of hard feeling when you compare the gills, which feel kind of feathery. That muscular foot is tough, and that's how they can get around. Some of them will use that muscular foot. If you're a scallop, it reminds me of like a compact of makeup, just kind of squish away, squid away, is how the scallop moves around. But all of these are different videos, watching these guys bury in the sand or swim around through the water column to try and get away, use their muscular foot to move themselves around. So lots of different ways to get around. Reproduction. These guys, a lot of our ones that we've talked about, we've said were monoecious. They had male and female parts. These are going to be different. They have separate sexes, just like you and me. They are going to have external, not like you and me, because we have internal fertilization, but these guys have external fertilization. So it's going to, eggs are laid and they are fertilized outside of the organism. That's external fertilization. And when those eggs get fertilized, they will develop into a larvae. And this little larvae is free swimming. And here's our little, no, go back. Here's our larvae. Go back. There we are. Here's our larvae. And they pretty much straight up parasitize other things. So the Glaucidia larvae are going to parasitize, if we are talking about certain types of mussels, they parasitize fish. And this video, I think, is really cool. It's one of my favorite ones to watch when we're talking about bivalves, because I'm not going to give it away. I'm not going to give it away, but it's really cool. Watch it and you'll find out why it's cool. And you'll get to see this life cycle in real life happening, at least with the Glaucidia larvae, and how that gets to the fish. So check it out, watch it, see how cool they are for this specific type of freshwater mussel, for the Lampsillus. More freshwater mussel examples. There are lots of freshwater mussels. Again, we think this is probably the first land animal, as it came from saltwater and evolved into being able to live in freshwater. And there are lots of them. They are threatened and endangered. There are lots of threatened and endangered ones. In the last 100 years, 33 species have actually gone extinct. 77 are critically endangered. Alabama and the Mississippi area watersheds have lots of diversity as far as bivalves that you can find, but some of this diversity was impacted when we create man-made lakes like Lake Allatoona and Lake Oconee and others like them. We are impacting the water in those areas. We are cutting off water from where it normally went and diverting it. And when we do that, we are impacting the ecosystem. We are impacting the fish that are trying to go from one place to the next, and all of that whole not food chain, but food net, where everything is connected, is impacted when we mess around and do stuff like that. Other things that can impact us, we've got examples of the rough pigtoe and these little cat's paws, are all things that are protected and endangered, that we need to look out for. And one of the things that is impacting this is an invasive. And how did it get here? It got here because of man. So the zebra mussels are an invasive species. And when I say invasive, it means that it's not from here. It gets introduced to an area, whether it's an invasive mussel or plant, whatever it is, animal, plant, whatever. It comes in and it takes the place of the native, whatever it is, the native plants or the native animals. And so the zebra mussel comes along into the Mobile River Basin, where I grew up, and starts taking over the habitat of the native shellfish in that area. And so they will displace the others. They will take the prime real estate. They will eat up more food, so there's not any left for the natives behind. And another thing that zebra mussels will do is they will clog pipes. So they will get into different areas and clog it up. So this video is talking about what you can possibly do about how you definitely don't want to like fill up your ballast tanks in one body of water, take your boat to another body of water, and then empty those ballast tanks. Don't do that. Don't do that. If you're a fisherman and you like to fish and go to different areas, cool, that's awesome. But try and think about being responsible and not transporting everything from one body of water to the next, because that's how we end up with things that shouldn't be in your bodies of water. And the zebra mussel is one of those things that got transported and dumped, and now it's taken over. One of these guys that is really cool because it has these beautiful, it's a scallop, has these beautiful eyes that you can see here that sense light. And these guys, when they sense the light, they sense the predator is creeping over top of me and blocking out the light. So I'm gonna swim away. Oh, excuse me. So these are really cool bay scallops, and the video link up here is just showing you a close-up of the eyeballs on these. And these guys are also some of the ones that are threatened. Lots of freshwater and brackish and marine bivalves are threatened and endangered. We are trying to replenish some of the oyster bed populations. I think they've been trying to replenish some oyster beds in the Chesapeake Bay for a while, and I don't know if they've had any success. I think that they've been trying for a couple of years and they're still working at it diligently to try and get it to take, because it's been a struggle to try and reintroduce these things to bodies of water when they've been farmed out, because there's a lot of different factors that go into them. But these are bivalves. We're going to move on to a different organism. Let's move on to snails. Snails, gastropods. And so they are literally gastropods. They're called stomach foots. They're rolling around, eating off of their slimy feet. So gastropods are snails, groups of mollusks, snails, your slugs, which are the shellless looking snails. It's also going to include your conchs, which are delicious. It's terrible. Your sea slugs. Remember we saw that beautiful little sea slug, that gorgeous little cute blue looking guy? This is another one. Here's some more. Sea butterflies and sea hares are all in this gastropoda group, this gastropoda class. These also have a large economic value, not into the trillions when we talk about the other massive impact, but 300 million is not something to snub your nose at. And that's just escargot. And if you have ever eaten escargot, it sounds disgusting, but I went to France and it was actually really good. Abalone has an insane price tag for those, often to the detriment of the organism. $2,000 a pound. That's crazy. So they do have most definitely economic value in gastropods in this class. They can be freshwater or saltwater. They can be land-bound or water. So they can be both. If they are aquatic, which we said most of the mollusks started in the water and then they moved on to land. If they were in water, they're going to use gills. Like we talked about, the water flows over the gills, oxygen diffuses out of the water into the cells, and then the waste, the CO2, is going to diffuse from the gills out into the water. So gills, if you're aquatic. If you are on land, if you're a snail on land, roaming through somebody's plants. I had a snail eating all my basil on the back patio. And that stinker is not using gills because he doesn't need gills when he's out of the water. He has an area called a pneumostome, and the pneumostome acts as kind of like a primitive lung for snails. So if you're land bound, you got a pneumostome. If you're in the aquatic, you are going to use gills. All of these guys, as far as snails, are usually going to be herbaceous, and they're going to have a mouth down here, and we don't have the picture of the radula. I have it coming up in another slide, but usually these guys in general are herbivores. Their circulation, how's their circulation? Bivalves had an open circulatory system, and so do gastropods. Open circulatory system. And we mentioned it's either going to have gills or a pneumostome, lungs, depending on where they are, where they live. Feeding. They are going to have a one-way system just like our bivalves did. It's going to have a mouth, going to go through, stomach, intestines, waste is going to go out. So one-way gut. When they feed, Here is a better kind of view of the mouth, and then this radula, this kind of razor edged, serrated edge. Mouth part is the radula, and when it comes down, it's like sandpaper. It looks like a cat's tongue, if anybody has cats at home. It looks like a cat's tongue, and it kind of acts the same way. It acts like sandpaper, and it's going to grate up the plant material that it's eating, the plant material, the algae that it eats, because most of these guys are herbivores, and they're going to use their radula. So if you've never seen what it looks like for a snail to eat, um, if you've never been to the pet store and seen a snail on the side of a fish tank, and you can actually watch their radula come along and eat the algae off the side of the tank, and then it'll leave a little trail through the algae where their radula was when they're using it. Some of these guys are going to use mucus nets, and they will capture plankton that way. So we said most of these guys are herbivores. They are going to eat plant material. Some of them are predators. Oh gosh, sorry, I said my 10th yawn in this video. Some of them are predators. Oyster borers are going to bore holes into the oyster, and then they are going to release their digestive enzymes and suck out the good stuff out of there. So these are showing oyster borer snails and all the holes left over when they attack. Another type of predatory snail is called a cone snail. I think these are super cool. You don't need to worry about these if you are here on the Gulf Coast. We don't need to worry about these. But the cone snail in South America, if you are south of the border, you do need to worry about this. So they have a venom that's going to come out of their proboscis. So we saw ribbon worms with their proboscis, and they shot it out right, and they envenomated their prey and ate it. So similar here with cone snails. So we have this video that you can watch. I think it's a good one that shows the cone snail hunting, how it hunts, and then envenomates its prey and brings it in. There is not an anti-venom. Like if you got struck by a rattlesnake and you knew what type of rattlesnake it was, you can tell the hospital, you know, I got struck by a timber rattler, and hopefully there is ready-made anti-venom for you, and you can have that, you know, your body injected with it and treat it and hopefully come back and battle that out. There is no anti-venom to the venom found in cone snails, at least not that I know of. So they are super cool at what they do, and it's really neat to see them hunt down a snail, hunting down a fish. How are they moving? Snails, if again, probably some of us have seen snails moving around on plants with their little slimy foot, and they're coating things, and then you can see their tongue eating the plant material, algae on the side of the fish tank, whatever. You can see that here in this video. I'm not going to ask you to watch that if you've already seen it. That's okay. This guy is super cool to watch. The sea hare swimming through the water column. I think that one's kind of cool to see. Reproduction on gastropods. Hermaphroditic for most of them. Some of them are going to have hermaphrodites. I said most of them. Some of them are hermaphroditic. Most of them are going to have separate sexes. And then they will do external fertilization, just like we talked about with the bivalves. They're going to lay the eggs, and then once the eggs are out, then the male comes along and fertilizes the eggs to create all of the little zygotes. So that is laying the mass of eggs out there, and they will external fertilize and grow up into new little gastropods. Our last class is going to be cephalopods. Cephalopods are all marine, all saltwater, and these guys are going to include octopus and squids and cuttlefish. These are all in cephalopods. They are going to be the group that has lost the shell and have turned it into the pin inside. They don't have an external shell on these guys, so they're pretty squishy. Again, most have lost their shell, except for the nautilus. Nautilus kept its shell. How do they feed? These guys are smart. They are problem solvers. They are going to be active predators. They will camouflage themselves. They have a one-way gut like all the other mollusks that we've talked about. You can watch these videos. I found some new ones. My old links didn't work, and they had gotten rid of those websites. They weren't hosting it anymore. So I found some new ones, and they are just as good as in past videos. So check out these on octopus, and then there's some on cuttlefish, and how they hunt, and how they change their color, how they can problem solve. Circulatory system, like we've said before, open circulatory system. They're going to have gills. And they are going to have on their heart, which is pretty cool, they are going to have different hearts. It's not just like one heart. You will see that they will have, we got our heart here and then accessory heart over here. So they're kind of cool in the fact that they have multiple hearts to pump their open circulatory system blood around. How do they get around? They're pretty much like jet skis. They are going to propel themselves by squirting out a stream of water. So water is going to come in. We'll relax, let the water come in just like a jellyfish, and then we're going to squeeze, and it's going to jet out of the bottom. So we're forcefully pushing that water out like a jet ski. Reproduction is going to have separate sexes. So gastropods, some are hermaphrodites. Most of them had separate sexes. Most of these guys, for cephalopods, have separate sexes too. They are going to have internal fertilization. The males are going to have a sperm packet that they will deliver to the females, and then those fertilized eggs will be attached to the surface and develop. These guys ink. I really should put in there my little line from emo. You made me ink. If you've seen it, I have kids, so of course I'm going there. But it's cute in Nemo. But if you watch those videos I mentioned before, it talks about how the ink can possibly poison its prey. If they release it, it can possibly deter predators because it might be toxic. It obviously is going to cloud up the water and give them a place to hide and run away for a split second when, whatever it is distracted by the ink. So it had lots of different traits and characteristics. So if you watch that video, it's pretty cool because it's not just, I can't see. Some of these things have toxins in there that will stun their prey. So pretty cool. How do they find their prey? They are stealth. They have chromatophores where they can change color. It's beautiful. I've got a video here of an octopus in camouflage. It will supplement the other two videos that I had in the previous slides. I totally ripped this off from Nat Geo, but look how beautiful. So gorgeous. This picture of how they can open up these little pigments with their muscles on those chromatophores and just so fast, change their color into these brilliant, brilliant colors. They're gorgeous. Eyes, they are hunters. They are good at hunting in part because they are going to have compound eyes like we do. And these evolved separately. This was not a common ancestor trait. This is a derived trait, just like ours are. It's derived for theirs too. So they have a compound eye. It's going to have a lens that is going to take that light coming in and focus it right on the back of the retina, just like ours does. So compound eyes, very similar to us. That is cephalopods. All the questions are at the very end of this. But if you have any questions about mollusks and the different classes that you need to know, please send me an email.